Michelle Williams had always been known in her town for her calm spirit and steady strength, but on a rainy Monday morning she felt anything but strong as she stepped carefully through the sliding glass doors of Riverbend Family Clinic. The waiting room smelled faintly of disinfectant and damp coats, a mixture that made her stomach tighten even more. For 3 weeks she had been living with a deep, twisting pain in her lower abdomen, a pain that stole her sleep and made each day at the school where she worked as a counselor feel twice as long. Her husband, David, had urged her again and again to see a doctor, and after finally agreeing she had scheduled an appointment with Dr. Rebecca Adams, a physician many neighbors described as experienced and efficient. Michelle carried a small folder of notes she had written about her symptoms, including the dates, the sharpness of the pain, and the times when it became almost unbearable. She believed that careful details would help the doctor understand. After signing in, Michelle sat near a window streaked with rain, trying to slow her breathing while the minutes dragged by. She watched a young mother calm a crying toddler and an older man cough softly into his handkerchief, small ordinary moments that made her own worry feel strangely heavy. When the nurse finally called her name, Michelle followed her down a narrow hallway where the hum of fluorescent lights mixed with the quiet beeping of machines. Inside the examination room, she perched on the paper-covered table and gripped her folder like a lifeline. When Dr. Adams entered, wearing a crisp white coat and a polite smile, Michelle began explaining everything she had carefully written down. She described the early morning cramps, the waves of nausea, the sudden stabbing aches that sometimes forced her to sit down at work. She spoke steadily, hoping that her words would paint a clear picture. Dr. Adams nodded occasionally but kept glancing at the computer screen, typing quickly. After only a few questions about diet, sleep, and whether Michelle had been under stress, the doctor leaned back and said in a pleasant, almost cheerful tone that it was probably nothing serious, most likely just a reaction to a busy schedule or a change in food habits. Michelle hesitated, surprised by how quickly the conclusion came, and quietly mentioned that the pain sometimes woke her at night, that it felt sharper than anything she had known. Dr. Adams offered a small shrug and suggested some over-the-counter medicine, adding that exercise and relaxation might help. The visit lasted barely 15 minutes. As Michelle left the room, she felt the weight of the folder in her hand, now useless, and a quiet ache of disappointment settled deeper than the pain in her stomach. Outside, the rain had turned to a cold drizzle that soaked her coat while she walked to the car. David was waiting behind the wheel, his eyes filled with concern as he asked what the doctor had said. Michelle tried to smile, repeating the words about stress and simple remedies, but her voice trembled in a way she could not hide. On the ride home, the windshield wipers kept a steady rhythm, and Michelle stared at the blur of gray streets, wondering if she had done something wrong, wondering if maybe she was imagining the severity of her own discomfort. By the time they reached their driveway, the pain had returned in a sharp wave, and she pressed a hand to her side, determined to believe the advice yet secretly fearing there was something more. That evening she sat in her favorite chair by the living room window, a warm blanket around her shoulders, listening to the rain tapping the glass. She thought about her students at school, the ones who came to her for help with small fears and big worries, and she remembered how she always told them to trust their feelings. The irony made her heart sink. David brought her a cup of herbal tea and urged her gently to rest, but as the night deepened and the house grew quiet, Michelle's mind refused to settle. She replayed the appointment again and again, each detail sharp: the brief glances at the computer, the quick nods, the polite smile that never quite reached the doctor's eyes. The pain pulsed steadily, and Michelle began to wonder how long she could endure it if nothing changed. She thought of calling the clinic again, of asking for tests or a second look, but a tired voice inside whispered that perhaps she should wait, that perhaps the doctor was right. When she finally went to bed, the rain had stopped but the air felt heavy, and as she lay in the dark listening to David's soft breathing beside her, she realized she was both exhausted and wide awake, caught between the need to trust her own body and the worry that no one else would. In that quiet space, she promised herself that if the pain grew worse she would not stay silent, even if it meant searching for help all over again. The next 7 days moved slowly for Michelle Williams, each hour marked by a dull ache that sometimes sharpened into a sudden twist so strong it took her breath away, yet she kept pushing through her routine because the school needed her and because she hoped the discomfort might fade on its own. Every morning she woke before sunrise to prepare for another day of counseling students at Riverbend Middle School, and though she smiled and listened carefully to the children's worries, she often had to steady herself by gripping the edge of her desk when the pain surged unexpectedly. David noticed the strain in her face each evening when she returned home, and he gently reminded her that the doctor's quick conclusion might not be enough, urging her to call again or look for another opinion, but Michelle hesitated, afraid of being seen as difficult or impatient. By the third evening, the discomfort grew so strong that even the warm bath she loved offered no relief, and she found herself curled on the couch with a heating pad while rain pelted the windows. David sat beside her with a worried frown and read aloud from a list of local clinics he had found, suggesting names of other physicians who might listen more carefully. Michelle agreed to try again but decided to first keep the follow-up appointment Dr. Rebecca Adams had scheduled for later in the week, hoping this time the doctor might understand the urgency. When Friday came, Michelle dressed in soft clothes and carried her folder of notes once again, now updated with new details of the worsening symptoms, and David drove her through light morning traffic to the clinic. The waiting room felt brighter than last time, sunlight streaming through the tall windows, but Michelle could not enjoy it, her stomach knotted with both pain and unease. After a short wait, she was called back to the same small examination room where the same fluorescent lights hummed faintly overhead. Dr. Adams entered with a brisk step and a polite smile, greeting Michelle as if only a few days had passed and nothing serious had changed. Michelle described the sharper pains, the restless nights, and the waves of nausea that sometimes left her trembling, speaking with quiet urgency and hoping her words carried the weight of her worry. Dr. Adams listened briefly, asked a few quick questions about diet and work stress, and then leaned against the counter with her arms crossed, suggesting that Michelle might be experiencing digestive upset from anxiety or perhaps a minor stomach virus. She recommended a bland diet, over-the-counter antacids, and light exercise, adding that there was no clear reason for further tests at the moment. Michelle felt a heavy disappointment settle over her chest, the same frustration from the first visit now doubled, and she carefully asked whether any scans or blood work might help rule out something more serious. Dr. Adams smiled in a way that seemed final and replied that it was not necessary yet, assuring her that the symptoms would likely fade on their own. The visit ended as quickly as it had begun. Michelle walked out slowly, her folder still clutched tightly but now feeling like a symbol of all the words that had failed to matter. In the car, David watched her face as she sank into the seat, her eyes reflecting both pain and quiet resolve. "We need another opinion," he said firmly, his voice steady but full of concern. Michelle nodded, no longer willing to argue. That night at home, the pain grew sharper, almost like a knife twisting deep inside, and Michelle doubled over near the kitchen counter, gripping it for balance while David rushed to steady her. He insisted they go to an urgent care center, but Michelle, breathing through the ache, asked for just a little more time to see if it would pass, her natural patience still fighting with her growing fear. They spent the evening together in the living room, David scrolling through his phone to find hospitals with late-night services while Michelle tried to sip warm tea, her thoughts racing. She thought of the children she counseled at school, how she always told them that their feelings and fears deserved respect, and she realized that her own feelings deserved the same. When the pain finally eased enough for her to stand, she looked at David and said softly that they would go somewhere else the next day. Early Saturday morning they drove to a nearby community hospital, a modest brick building with a calm atmosphere that felt strangely welcoming compared to the sterile clinic. The intake nurse listened carefully as Michelle explained everything, taking notes and asking questions that made her feel heard for the first time in weeks. Within an hour, Michelle was guided to a quiet room where another doctor, a gentle and attentive physician named Dr. Angela Brooks, introduced herself and asked detailed questions about Michelle's symptoms, medical history, and the timeline of her pain. Dr. Brooks maintained steady eye contact, her voice calm and encouraging, and she quickly ordered blood tests and imaging scans to look deeper for any hidden problem. As Michelle lay on the examination bed for the scan, she felt a wave of cautious relief because someone finally seemed to take her suffering seriously. David stayed beside her the entire time, holding her hand and offering quiet words of comfort. While waiting for the results, Michelle reflected on how different this experience felt compared to the hurried visits with Dr. Adams. Here, every concern was acknowledged, every question answered patiently. When Dr. Brooks returned with preliminary findings, her expression was serious yet compassionate. She explained that the scans showed signs of an intestinal blockage that required immediate treatment to prevent dangerous complications. Michelle listened with a mixture of fear and gratitude, her heart racing at the thought of a real diagnosis but also thankful that the truth was finally uncovered before it was too late. Dr. Brooks assured her that the hospital staff would take swift action and that she was in good hands. As nurses prepared her for the next steps, Michelle felt David squeeze her hand and whisper that everything would be all right, and in that moment she realized how important it had been to keep searching for help even when her first efforts were dismissed. Though worry still lingered, she felt a quiet strength return, the strength that came from being heard, from trusting herself, and from knowing that she had chosen not to give up. Michelle Williams lay quietly in the hospital room, the soft beeping of the monitor beside her bed creating a steady rhythm that almost matched her heartbeat, and for the first time in weeks she felt a cautious sense of safety because someone was finally taking her pain seriously. After the late-night scans revealed the intestinal blockage, Dr. Angela Brooks and her medical team moved quickly, explaining each step in calm, reassuring voices that helped Michelle stay steady even as her nerves trembled. David sat close to her, never letting go of her hand, his presence a constant source of comfort as nurses prepared her for a minor surgical procedure to remove the blockage and prevent any further damage. Michelle listened carefully while Dr. Brooks described how the obstruction could have become dangerous if left untreated, and she felt a mix of gratitude and disbelief that it had taken this long for anyone to recognize what was happening inside her body. As she was wheeled into the procedure room, bright lights above her, Michelle closed her eyes and whispered a quiet prayer of thanks for finally being in the right place with the right people. The operation itself was straightforward and successful, and when she awoke to see David's relieved smile, she felt a deep wave of peace that made her eyes fill with tears. The next morning Dr. Brooks visited with encouraging news: the blockage had been fully cleared, her recovery would be smooth, and with proper rest and follow-up care she could soon return to her normal life. Michelle thanked her repeatedly, overwhelmed by the doctor's kindness and the attentiveness of the entire staff. Over the next 2 days she rested in the bright, cheerful room where sunlight streamed through wide windows, nurses checking her vitals and offering warm smiles that reminded her how important compassion is in medicine. David brought her books, flowers, and small treats to make the stay more comfortable, and their quiet conversations about ordinary things, family, favorite recipes, future plans helped her heal as much as the medical care itself. In those calm hours Michelle thought back to her earlier visits to Dr. Rebecca Adams and felt a heavy realization settle inside her. If she had not trusted her own instincts, if she had accepted those quick dismissals as the final word, the outcome could have been far more serious. She remembered every detail of those appointments, the rushed questions, the polite but distant smile, the way her concerns had been brushed aside, and she felt a mix of sadness and resolve. She did not want anger to consume her, but she knew that something needed to change so others would not face the same neglect. On the third evening, after she had taken a slow walk down the quiet hospital corridor and enjoyed her first pain-free dinner in weeks, Michelle and David sat together discussing their next steps. David suggested that once she was fully recovered, they should share their experience with the hospital's patient advocacy department, not out of revenge but to help improve care for everyone. Michelle agreed, realizing that telling her story could encourage others to speak up when they felt unheard. The following morning Dr. Brooks returned with the final test results and patiently answered every question Michelle asked about her recovery plan. Before leaving, the doctor gently said she was proud of Michelle for seeking a second opinion and reminded her that self-advocacy is a form of strength. Those words stayed with Michelle long after the doctor left the room. When the discharge papers were finally signed and she was free to go home, Michelle walked slowly through the hospital's front doors into the bright afternoon light, holding David's hand and breathing in the crisp air with a sense of renewal. The drive home felt different this time. The trees along the road seemed greener, the sky wider, and even the small houses they passed looked more alive, as though the world itself was celebrating her recovery. At home, neighbors dropped by with flowers and warm meals, expressing relief that she was feeling better. Michelle thanked them all, her heart full of quiet gratitude. That evening, after a gentle meal of soup and tea, she sat by the window and reflected on how fragile yet resilient life could be. The sharp pain that once ruled her days had been replaced by a deep appreciation for every ordinary moment: the sound of rain against the roof, the scent of David's coffee brewing in the kitchen, the laughter of children playing down the street. She realized how easily she might have lost these simple joys if she had ignored her own instincts. Over the next week she regained her strength, taking short walks in the garden and exchanging friendly conversations with neighbors who were curious about her hospital stay. Many of them listened with wide eyes as she described how one doctor had overlooked her symptoms while another had acted quickly and saved her from serious harm, and several admitted they too had once felt dismissed during medical visits. Each conversation deepened Michelle's belief that sharing her story was important. David encouraged her to write everything down, not only for a formal complaint but also as a record of courage and perseverance. Together they drafted a detailed letter to the clinic administration describing the entire experience, carefully avoiding harsh language but making sure every important fact was clear. Michelle explained how the first doctor's lack of attention delayed her diagnosis and how crucial it was that patients be listened to with care and respect. When the letter was complete, she felt a quiet sense of closure, as though her voice was finally being heard beyond the walls of her home. A few days later she received a kind response from the hospital where Dr. Brooks worked, thanking her for sharing and assuring her that they would use her experience to help educate staff and improve patient care. Michelle felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that something positive might come from her difficult journey. As she sat in her living room that night, the house filled with the soft glow of evening light, Michelle reflected on the path she had traveled from confusion and doubt to healing and hope, and she felt stronger than she ever had before. Though the road had been painful and frightening, it had also revealed the power of persistence, the importance of loved ones who stand beside you, and the quiet strength of believing in your own worth even when others do not immediately see it. The first crisp morning of autumn arrived just as Michelle Williams regained her full strength, and with her recovery came a clear sense of purpose that guided each step she took beyond her home's quiet walls, for she knew her experience could help others who might one day face the same quiet dismissal she had endured. A week after sending her detailed letter to the clinic where Dr. Rebecca Adams worked, Michelle received a polite reply from the administration acknowledging her concerns and promising a formal review, and though the message was brief, it carried the weight of something larger beginning to move. Encouraged by David and several close friends, Michelle decided to share her story more widely, starting with a community health forum hosted at the public library, where local residents gathered to learn about patient rights and ways to navigate the healthcare system. Standing before a small but attentive audience, Michelle spoke in a calm, steady voice, recounting how her pain had first appeared, how she had trusted her own careful notes, and how difficult it had been to realize that her first doctor had not truly listened. The listeners nodded and asked questions, some quietly sharing their own moments of feeling overlooked, and Michelle felt a new connection forming among neighbors who might never have met otherwise. Soon after, a local newspaper journalist named Karen Mitchell approached her for an interview, explaining that the paper planned a series on patient advocacy and wanted to include her experience as a way to highlight the importance of second opinions and thorough care. Michelle agreed, believing that the more people understood, the safer their own medical journeys could be. The article ran on a Sunday morning beneath the headline "Listening to Patients, One Woman's Call for Change," and though the words were gentle and respectful, they carried a quiet power that reached far beyond their small town. Emails began arriving from people she had never met, teachers, parents, retirees, all thanking her for speaking out and sharing their own stories of times when they, too, had not been heard. Michelle read each message carefully, humbled by the trust strangers placed in her and comforted by the knowledge that her experience was helping others feel less alone. Meanwhile, the clinic's internal review continued, and after several weeks Michelle received a formal letter stating that the board had completed a thorough investigation. The letter explained that Dr. Adams would undergo additional training on patient communication, diagnostic vigilance, and cultural awareness, and that new policies were being adopted to ensure that every patient's concerns were fully evaluated before a case was considered routine. There was no anger in the words, only a commitment to improvement, yet Michelle understood that real change often began in small steps like these. David read the letter aloud at the kitchen table while the evening sun painted the room in warm light, and Michelle felt a quiet satisfaction settle over her heart. She had not sought punishment, she had wanted understanding, and this was a start. A few days later, the local hospital where Dr. Angela Brooks worked invited Michelle to speak at a larger public seminar on self-advocacy in healthcare, and though the idea of addressing a large crowd made her nervous, she accepted, remembering how lost she had felt before someone finally listened. On the day of the event, the auditorium buzzed with conversation as families, students, and medical staff filled the rows of seats. When Michelle stepped onto the stage, her voice trembled at first, but soon the story flowed naturally, filled with the honesty and clarity that had guided her since the ordeal began. She spoke not only of her own pain but also of the importance of compassion in medicine, of the need for patients to believe in their own instincts, and of the quiet courage required to ask for help again when the first answer does not feel right. The audience responded with warm applause, and afterward many people approached to share their gratitude, including young medical students who promised to remember her words in their future practice. Later that evening, Michelle and David walked through the quiet downtown streets under a sky sprinkled with stars, their hearts light with a shared sense of accomplishment. Michelle reflected on how far she had come from the rainy day when she first entered Dr. Adams's office with silent hope to this night when her voice had carried across an entire auditorium and she felt a strength within herself that no doubt or pain could ever erase. Back at home she found another letter waiting in the mailbox, This one from a regional healthcare association inviting her to join a patient advisory council that would meet monthly to discuss improvements across local clinics and hospitals. Michelle smiled as she read it, realizing that what had begun as a personal struggle was now growing into a chance to help shape the very system that had once overlooked her. She accepted the invitation, eager to continue the work. Over the following weeks she attended council meetings, offering thoughtful suggestions on communication training, patient feedback systems, and the importance of second opinions, and she listened as other members shared valuable insights from their own experiences. Each meeting strengthened her belief that positive change could come when ordinary people chose to speak with honesty and kindness. Meanwhile, life at home settled back into a gentle rhythm. Michelle returned to her counseling work at school, where colleagues greeted her with warm smiles and students eagerly shared their small victories and worries. She found renewed purpose in her job, using her own story to gently encourage children to trust their feelings and speak up when something felt wrong, whether in school or in life. In the evenings she and David enjoyed quiet dinners, slow walks, and the simple peace of knowing that the hardest part of the journey was behind them. Sometimes Michelle thought of Dr. Adams, imagining her attending the recommended training sessions, perhaps reflecting on the letters and reports that had prompted the review, and though Michelle would never know the details, she chose to hope that the experience was shaping the doctor into someone more attentive and compassionate. There was no bitterness in her heart, only a steady wish for improvement, because she understood now that true healing involved more than just the body. It involved understanding, forgiveness, and the determination to make the path easier for those who would come after. As autumn deepened and leaves turned gold and crimson outside her window, Michelle felt a quiet joy each morning as she prepared for her day, a joy born from the knowledge that her voice, once nearly ignored, had helped others find their own. Winter sunlight poured through the tall windows of Michelle Williams's living room, spreading a gentle glow across the wooden floor as she sat with a cup of warm tea and reflected on how far her life had traveled since the morning when sharp pain first bent her double and left her searching for answers she could not find. Months had passed since the hospital stay and the community forums, yet the memory of those uncertain days remained as clear as ever, not as a source of fear but as a quiet reminder of the strength that had carried her through. Her calendar was now filled with meetings of the Regional Patient Advisory Council, and each gathering brought new stories of hope, small victories, and steady change across clinics and hospitals in the area. Michelle listened carefully to every voice at the table, from retired nurses who spoke of lessons learned over long careers to young parents who had navigated difficult diagnoses for their children, and she offered her own thoughts with the same calm honesty that had guided her from the beginning. Together they proposed new systems for follow-up care, easier ways for patients to request second opinions, and simple communication practices that encouraged doctors to listen more and speak with greater care. Each suggestion felt like a brick in a foundation of trust, a structure built slowly but firmly for the future. David often attended the meetings with her, proud of the way she transformed personal hardship into community service, and afterward they would walk through the quiet downtown streets hand in hand, their breath forming small clouds in the cold air as they talked about the next steps they hoped to see. At home, Michelle's work as a school counselor took on deeper meaning too, because she found herself reminding students daily that their feelings and instincts mattered, that a person's voice, no matter how small, deserved to be heard. She created new after-school workshops on self-advocacy, teaching young people how to speak up respectfully when they needed help, and the principal soon invited her to lead a parent seminar as well. The sessions grew popular, drawing families from across town, and many parents approached her afterward to thank her for sharing the lessons she had learned in such a personal way. On weekends, Michelle and David welcomed neighbors and friends who wanted updates on the progress of the advisory council, and each conversation strengthened a growing network of people dedicated to better care for everyone. Letters continued to arrive, some from distant towns, from people who had read about her story in the newspaper or heard her speak at a health seminar. Many shared their own journeys through confusing medical situations, and Michelle responded to as many as she could, offering encouragement and simple advice about seeking second opinions and trusting inner strength. One afternoon a package arrived from a woman in another state who had faced a similar delay in diagnosis. Inside was a handmade quilt with a note that read, "Thank you for giving me courage to keep asking questions." Michelle ran her fingers across the careful stitches and felt an almost overwhelming gratitude for the connections born from an experience that had once felt like a private battle. Meanwhile, the clinic where Dr. Rebecca Adams practiced released a public statement outlining new policies for patient communication and diagnostic review, citing the importance of recent community feedback. When Michelle read the notice online, she felt no triumph, only a calm satisfaction that her efforts had helped create real change. She sometimes wondered how Dr. Adams was adjusting to the new expectations and additional training, and though they had not spoken since the early appointments, Michelle chose to hope that the doctor had embraced the chance to grow, because true progress, she believed, required everyone to move forward together. The months continued to unfold with quiet purpose. Spring returned, bringing soft rains and the scent of blooming trees, and Michelle found herself invited to speak at a regional healthcare conference where doctors, nurses, and policy leaders gathered to discuss patient safety. Standing before the large audience, she shared her journey from confusion and pain to healing and advocacy, her voice steady and warm as she described the difference compassion had made in her recovery. Many in the crowd took notes, nodding as she emphasized that every patient's story is unique and every concern deserves respect. After the speech, a young medical student approached her with shining eyes and said, "Your words will guide the way I treat my future patients." That simple statement stayed with Michelle for days, a reminder that even small ripples can spread across wide waters. At home, life remained filled with everyday joys, morning walks through the neighborhood with David, laughter shared with colleagues at the school, evenings spent reading by the fire as the sun dipped behind the hills. Yet beneath those gentle rhythms flowed a steady awareness of purpose, the understanding that her experience was part of a larger movement toward kindness and careful listening in healthcare. One bright Saturday, the Advisory Council organized a community celebration to honor volunteers and highlight the new patient-friendly programs now active in clinics across the county. Families gathered in the town park, children played near the fountain, and music drifted through the mild air while Michelle moved from table to table greeting people whose lives had touched hers in countless ways. When the council chair invited her to the small stage to offer a few words, she looked out over the smiling faces and felt a wave of gratitude so strong it nearly brought tears. She spoke simply, thanking everyone for believing that change was possible and reminding them that every person, no matter their background or story, deserved to be heard and cared for with respect. The applause that followed was warm and steady, echoing across the park like a promise for the future. Later that evening, Michelle and David returned home tired but happy, carrying a basket of handwritten notes from neighbors expressing thanks and support. They sat together on the porch as the stars brightened above, holding hands in the quiet night, and Michelle thought back to the first cold, rainy day when she had walked into the clinic with her careful folder of notes and a hope that someone would listen. The path from that moment to this peaceful evening had been long and sometimes painful, but it had also been filled with unexpected gifts, deeper love, stronger friendships, and a new understanding of how powerful a single voice can be when it speaks with truth and kindness. As the night air grew cooler, Michelle rested her head on David's shoulder and closed her eyes, feeling the steady beat of his heart and the gentle certainty that she had turned hardship into healing, not only for herself but for many others, and that this quiet victory would continue to grow, shaping a world where every person's pain was met with care and every story, no matter how small, was finally heard.